Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode. We're going to be working on Unit 9, Lessons 1 and 2. Our topic of the day is senses, or our senses. Let's get started. Now, our learning objectives are, we're going to talk about Braille. We're going to learn what Braille is. And then we're going to read about Louis Braille and answer questions. And we will use non-defining relative clauses. That's our grammar part for today. Now, I want you to look at the pictures and match the questions and answers. So, question is, number 1, what is the name of the system that blind people use to read? Of course, this one is done for us. It's called Braille. Now, question 2, how do blind people know what is written on a page? What do you think, guys? They use their fingers to touch the different signs, or there are 6 in different places? Of course, it is A, 2A. What about how many dots are in each shape? There are 6 dots in each shape in different places. And those dots, of course, represent a certain letter. Now, let's move on to our magazine article. We're going to read about Louis Braille. Louis Braille was born in 1809. Became blind after an accident when he was 3. At first, Louis went to school in his village where his father made equipment for horses. When he was 10, he went to a school for blind children in Paris. In the school library, there were 14 books, which had a system of dots instead of letters. When students touched the letters, they could work out the meaning of the words. Louis wanted to find a way to improve the system. In 1821, a man called Charles Babbare visited the school. Babbare, who was a soldier, showed the students his own system of dots on paper. It was used by soldiers to read and write messages at night. Louis decided to improve Babbare's systems to make it easier for blind people to use. When he was 15, he wrote his first book of signs. He continued adding more signs to his system. He also made up signs for math and music. The signs took his name, Braille. These days, new technology has made Braille even easier to use. Some computers, which can quickly change text into Braille, now have Braille printers. Electronic books, e-books, can also be read in Braille. You can find Braille in many different languages all over the world. There are even Braille dictionaries, so the blind adults and children can look up words and find out their meanings. Now we're going to look at our new vocabulary words, equipment and workout. So what do you guys think equipment for horses means? Maybe like tools or things used for a horse when you're going to ride a horse maybe. And if I'm not sure about something, I might work out the meaning of it. So working out is kind of like finding it out. In this text, it means to find out something or to guess something. But of course, when we're talking about exercising, working out is actually the act of exercising itself. So we're going to jump to exercise 3. Answer the question. How did Louis Braille become blind? You guys remember what happened to him at the age of 3? He had an accident. Number 2, where did he first find books that use dots as a text? Where did he find those books? He found them in the library of the school for blind children in Paris. So that was the place of where he found the books that had Braille. Number 3, why were soldiers using a system of dots? Why do you think soldiers needed to use a system of dots? Do you think they were blind? Not really. It's to help them read and write messages at night because they could not see at night due to the darkness. Number 4, what signs did Louis invent after he was 15? What were the signs that he invented after he turned 15? He made up signs for maths and music. So he was Actually, part of the reason we have science for maths and music today. I'm not sure if you're going to thank him or not. Let's go on to number 5. How does new technology help blind people to use Braille these days? How does new technology help blind people to use Braille these days? Of course, computers can quickly change text into Braille and have Braille printers. E-books also can be read in Braille. So now it's easier because blind people can listen to audios, or they can turn a text into Braille and have it printed out for them to be able to read. So the access for Braille language is easier than before, and access to reading texts is also easier. Now we're going to jump to our lesson 2, unit 9. We're going to underline the relative clauses, and then we're going to circle the noun that each relative clause gives you more information about. So our noun for number 1 is Louis Braille. Now we're going to learn extra information about Louis Braille. So it is a relative clause here. Who was born in 1809, became blind after an accident when he was 3. So we will circle the noun, and then we will underline the relative clause or the extra piece of information about that subject. Now let's look at number 2. Louis went to school in his village where his father made equipment for horses. Of course, we will circle our subject, which is Louis, and then we're going to underline the relative clause where his father made equipment for horses. Now let's go to number 3. Barbier, who was a soldier, showed the students his own system of dots on paper. In this case, what is our subject? Of course, it's Barbier, so we will circle Barbier, and then we will underline the relative clause, who was a soldier. How do we know the relative clause? We'll ask ourselves which piece of information is extra here. If we remove it, it will not affect the meaning of the sentence. Then we know that this is the relative clause. Let's jump to number 4. Some computers which can quickly change text into Braille now have Braille print. So of course our subject is computers, and our relative clause is which can quickly change text into Braille. Now we're jumping to our grammar box. Non-defining relative clauses. Now we use non-defining relative clauses to give us extra information about the noun. Why do we say extra information? Because if we remove it, it will not affect the meaning of the sentence. If I remove the relative clause from the sentence, it will not affect the meaning of the sentence. Therefore, we call it extra information. Now, the second point, we use the relative pronoun which for things and animals. So if I'm going to talk about things and animals, I must use the relative pronoun which. Let's look at the examples. The example, elephants which live for around 45 years are found in Africa. So here we used which because we're talking about animals, not people. Let's jump to the third point. We use the relative pronoun where for places and when for time. We went to visit my cousins in Luxor, where they have lived since 1970. Here we used where to show the place, and in the second example we will read now, we will use when to show time. The photo shows Alexandria in 1990, when my parents lived there. So it was a time, therefore we used when. Let's jump to the fourth point. We use the relative pronoun whose to show possession, or to show ownership of something, to show that something is owned by someone. Mr. Adil, whose factory produces cotton clothes, is very rich. So here we used whose in the relative clause to show that Mr. Adil owns the factory that produces cotton clothes. Now, the last point in our grammar box, there is always a comma before a non-defining relative clause, and after the clause if it's in the middle of the sentence. If we add a relative clause in the middle of a sentence, we will hug it with 2 commas, one in the beginning of the relative clause and one after. But if I'm not putting it in the middle, I'm putting it in the latter half of the sentence or the second half of the sentence, then I will use only 1 comma before the relative clause. If you do not understand this part, you can rewind and listen slowly. I'm sure you will grasp it. Let's go on to remembering. Check the noun before added information. So if I'm going to talk about a human in my relative clause, I must use who. If I'm talking about things, I must use which. If I talk about a place, I will use when. If I talk about a time, I will start with where. If I talk about possession or ownership of something, I will talk about whose. I will use whose. Now, I want you to join the sentences using a non-defining relative clause. The first one is done for us, so let's look at the example. We want to join the two sentences together using a non-defining relative clause, similar to the examples we have read before. It is not new. Now, number one, I always visit my grandparents when school finishes. They live next door. So I can say, I always visit my grandparents, comma, who live next door, comma, when school finishes. Now, let's jump to number two. Abu Ghurab is a very interesting place. We went there on our school trip last year. Now, how can we add a non-defining relative clause using the two sentences? Let's take a look together. Abu Ghurab, where we went on our school trip last year, is a very interesting place. Why did I use where and not when or whose? It's probably because Abu Ghurab is a place. I must use where for my non-defining relative clause. Let's jump to number three. Our school is more than 100 years old. It has 1,000 students. In this case, we're talking about a subject that is our school. So in this case, we will say, our school, which has about 1,000 students, is more than 100 years old. Or I might say, our school, which is more than 100 years old, has about 1,000 students. Both answers are correct. Now let's jump to number four. The tour guide gave us a tour of the city. He knew everything about Egypt. So our topic or our title is the tour guide. So let's see how we're going to use it. The tour guide, who knew everything about Egypt, gave us a tour of the city. Why did I use who? Because we're talking about the person. The tour guide is a person. It's a man or a woman. Actually, it's a man in this case because of he, the personal pronoun. Now, let's look at another way to say it. The tour guide who gave us a tour of the city knew everything about Egypt. So, both are correct. Now, we're going to jump to our completing the following sentences with defining relative clauses. Let's look at the example first. My best friend who sits next to me in class lives near me. And then the other person says, my best friend who is called Hani is 13 years old. Now, we can create our own. My best friend, who is Shireen, loves kickboxing. Let's look at number two. My city or village where I was born is very beautiful. Why did I use where? Because I'm talking about a place. Let's go to number three. Our school, which I like very much, is 10 years old. In this case, I used which to show that the school is a thing. Now, let's jump to our wrap-up. We have completed the following. We talked about Braille. We read an article about Braille. And we have also used non-defining relative clauses. Guys, you did a great job today. Thank you. You were awesome. Bye.